Hello, hi, hello, hi, welcome in. For those of you who are new here, I'm Eileen, and I personally love to talk about growth in all areas of life, but precisely love to talk about growth within the career space. And not just growth for the sake of growth, but growth with a pretty big emphasis on spirituality, femininity, and looking at careers from that perspective. So, as some of you know, over the next couple of weeks, I will continue to share my story with you. I've already done several videos over the past maybe 2 to 3 weeks. So, today I particularly want to talk about the story of how I switched careers from marketing to engineering. Essentially, my journey from a non technical role into a technical role. And of course, feel free to drop any questions as we go along. I'll be more than happy to chat through all of that. So yeah, let's start with thinking about how this all started. Last week, I spoke about my decision to leave the job that I was working at the time. It was within a tech company, but I was doing a non-technical role, essentially marketing. And I knew that I wanted to switch some to something. It wasn't very clear what it was. And then after some internal reflection, I decided that I wanted to actually pursue my interest in learning how to code and therefore started looking at engineering roles. And then I started thinking about, okay, if I want to go from marketing to engineering, it's funny because many people, every time I tell them, like, hey, I was a marketer before and then switched into software engineering, they pretty much always, without fail, look at me with a bit of shock, a bit of surprise, and say, wow, that's a big switch. And the truth is, yes, it is a big switch. It's a bit of a switch in terms of mentality in the actual role, because one might be a little bit more creative and strategic on the outside, and the other one might be a little bit more logical from the outside. But in reality, I feel like you can use similar skill sets within both. Of course, like once you're in an engineering role, there are very particular technical capabilities you want to have. So when you're maybe in a similar position, thinking about switching into software engineering, maybe from another uh, career path, then you kind of have to think about what do you want your journey to look like. And that's what happened with me. I started thinking about, well, if I'm going to make this switch, what do I want that journey to look like? Looked at the multiple options. There's, of course, going to graduate school. There's learning software engineering, being self-taught, essentially, learning on your own. And then there are coding boot camps. And of course, you're not limited to any one of these options. They're all available to you, and you can mix and match various of these. I've saw people doing a huge mix of these three options. But I personally decided I wanted to do a coding boot camp. I wanted to dive straight into the actual coding part of it, because that's where my interest was. That's what pretty much sparked this desire in the beginning when I was back in college, when I decided in college not to pursue it because I had a lot on my plate. Um, the interest always went back to the coding. So I decided to do a coding boot camp and pretty much decided to go all in. And I won't say that the coding boot camp is the best option for every single person. Everyone has to decide for themselves what the right path is for themselves. For me, this felt like the right path because it aligned a lot more closely with what I was desiring at the time. This was back in 2019 when I decided to do this. So my next decision was to go all in, absolutely, entirely all in, which is why in my previous video I mentioned that I went as far as deciding to leave my job. And I don't recommend that everyone do this. It's what my heart wanted at the time, and that's why I decided to make it work. Of course, I got myself in a good place financially before I did that. And I knew that this was a risky move. There could be a possibility that I would go this route, and it completely failed. But the truth was that I was entirely okay with that happening because I got very clear inside of myself about what I wanted and what I did not want. And what I did not want was to not bet on myself. I wanted to bet on myself essentially. So decided to go all in, even went as far as doing a coding boot camp in London. Of course, I was living in San Francisco, the Bay Area in general at the time. And I was already within a tech company, one of the major tech companies, Google. So it's like, yeah, I could have gone that route of doing a coding boot camp while I was still working. I could have gone the route of doing a coding boot camp in San Francisco, or even going back home to New York and doing a coding boot camp there. But none of that excited me. None of that felt like my heart really wanted to go in that direction. So I didn't. I didn't take that route, the quote unquote easy route. I went the route of adventure. So when I was looking at all of the various options available to me of boot camps, I saw one in Spain, I saw one in London, and I figured doing the one in London would make the most sense because, London is a city that's very similar to New York, and I would feel a lot more at home. Plus, English is the primary language, so there would be very little language barrier in terms of learning. Um, of course, British and American English are a little bit different, but it was more fun than a hindrance to my learning. So it was just the best option. I didn't study abroad in college, so I decided, well, if I'm going to go back to doing any kind of studying, I absolutely want to do it abroad. So that's why I decided to do it in London. And plus, in addition to that, I didn't realize this until after I was at the boot camp that doing it abroad actually was great because it lent itself to focus. I was able to fully focus on just doing what I was there to do, which was learn and enjoy being in a new place because I didn't have the distractions of like maybe what I have back at home, all the relationships, all the friendships, all the family that I have back home, which might have served as a potential distraction away from my desire to learn to code. So that was the journey to the actual coding boot camp. Once I got there, however, that was a whole different beast. So the coding boot camp was great because the very first day we got to meet a lot of the other folks, of course. This was in person. I didn't end up doing this was pre-pandemic, so it was in person, not virtual. And yeah, met a lot of people, several people from, of course, from the UK, many, many, many people from the UK, but there were also a couple of people from um, the US. There was one girl who was living in the UK, but she's from Costa Rica. So it was a just really good group of people. And believe it or not, I almost quit the coding boot camp. I remember it was about week one and we were doing a project and I called my mom and I told her, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this because it felt so tough for me. But she told me, hey, Aline, you tested it out prior to going to this coding boot camp. Like you passed the test in order to get into it. Um, just keep going. You're already there. You're already there. What do you have to lose? So I decided to just continue forward. I did have some failures the second week as well. But it ended up turning out pretty well because what happens when you hit a road bump at the coding boot camp that I was at is that they make you do a project by yourself instead of in pairs. Um, and so I was pretty much able to choose a project that I wanted to work on personally, which felt very aligned with who I am as a person. And the project I decided to work on was creating a journaling app. Not a journaling app, that was a little bit later, a quotes app for that second week. The second module, essentially, is what they called it. So for that second module, I was able to create a quotes app on my own, had full autonomy over what the app would look and feel like, what it would do, the capabilities it would have. Just the parameters that they gave us were that it had to be in a specific coding language, and of course, using the skills that they taught us the week prior. So that was fine. It ended up, turning out pretty well. And at the end of the entire coding boot camp, ended off pretty strong. Worked on another project that I really thought aligned with who I am as a human being, as a person, as a woman. And it was to create a journaling app that I mentioned a little earlier. And I did the app where it's like you can mark where specifically in the world you were when you created the journal entry. And we did the project showcase at the very end, and lots of people loved the app. So I thought that that went pretty well. So yeah, there were some highs, there were some lows in the coding bootcamp, but all in all, it was a beautiful journey that I look back on till this day and say, wow, I can't believe I can't believe I was crazy enough to just get up, leave my job, go to another country and study a completely different skill set than what I was doing previously. But, you know, I was taking myself on this journey of this beautiful adventure that I'm still very grateful for. After the coding bootcamp, I remember taking a little bit of a break, about a month, traveled to Greece, which was a lot of fun, and then came back to New York and decided, okay, a month in, let's see, let's start the job search. And I had to make decisions about what kind of job did I want now. And of course, I could have gone back to marketing and used the skill sets that I learned, the more technical skills that I learned in the marketing world. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it was a courageous move for sure, but it was a lot of it was a journey. It was a fun journey for sure. There were some moments of anxiety, but at the same time, it ended up feeling good after I was done with it. It was like, oh, this is something I could look back on. And I remember creating videos while I was there as well. So I've documented a little bit of the journey, which I'm really happy about. And yeah, I started thinking about, if I'm going to do this, I could go back to marketing and use the technical skills that I learned here in the marketing space, or I can get an engineering job, or I can go the product management route. I decided, well, I'm already learning to code. I've already gained the skill set, or at least started to gain the skill set by that point in time. So let's just continue on this path. I was very curious to see what would materialize from me being on that journey. And so I decided, well, I don't want to put a ton of pressure on myself by like going for entry level software engineering roles. So what I ended up doing instead was looking for apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are essentially programs within large companies where you get to learn. And the goal of the program is to learn. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to keep learning, because, of course, a coding bootcamp, you can only learn so much within that space, within that amount of time. And so doing an apprenticeship would lend itself to me continuing that education that I started in a space where they're expecting you to continue to learn. They're essentially investing in you, they're investing in your future. And at the same time, you are dedicating time to learning within the walls of the company that you worked for. So, me personally, I looked at various apprenticeship opportunities, and the one that really stood out to me was LinkedIn because of exactly what I'm doing right now. The fact that I knew that in my future, I would want to do some sort of career coaching of sorts. This is like something I was pretty passionate about since college days, where I was part of multiple organizations where we were helping students essentially connect with large companies, mostly banks and accounting firms, based on like the school that I was in and the organization I was working for. I mean, I was volunteering for, but essentially I was doing this whole unofficial career coaching for a really long time since college. So, because I knew that this was going to be part of my future, I decided that LinkedIn would be the best next step in terms of company that I would want to work for. Um, and I would love to continue on next week and tell you guys the story of how that all what came to be. But there were multiple other um, apprenticeship opportunities like at Airbnb. I believe Intuit had one. There was Pinterest, um, Twilio, Uber, I believe, had one, Microsoft. So many options. So I am the type of person, if you've been listening to my previous videos, who tends to pinpoint one company I would like to work for and then go all in on that company. Um, but I was still, of course, looking at all the options, all the opportunities, all of the apprenticeships that were available, um, based on companies that I would find exciting. So, for example, Airbnb. At that time, I've used Airbnb at that point in time several times in order to, travel and stay in nice homes instead of hotels. So, Airbnb was an exciting option. Was it the perfect fit? Not necessarily, but I decided to pursue that opportunity because um, I felt like it aligned with me and things that I find exciting, which is how I've tended to make career decisions um, ever since that year, 2019. That's when I really started making heart-led career decisions in terms of where do I want to be next? What's exciting to me? What am I curious about? What in what ways do I want to invest in myself in a way that feels exciting and like an adventure? And like, yes, of course, growth is going to be part of it. So stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to tell the story of how I got my very first engineering job. And at that point in time, I will share a little bit about the job search journey of doing uh, pretty much like the actual transition, not necessarily transition, but just like the thought process that goes into more technical interviews or preparing for technical screenings, things of that nature. So, yeah, that will be next week. It's been great over the past couple of weeks connecting with people who have reached out from after watching our videos and chatting about their careers and where they want to go next. I personally love to work with hardworking, heart centered women, but really, I would love to work with people in general who work in tech or want to work in the tech industry and are feeling super lost, scattered, or simply having a difficult time in the job search so that we can get them to a place where there's a lot of clarity in their vision. There's confidence about how they're going to go about getting the jobs that they desire, the ones that they're excited about, so that they can live out vivacious careers that make them feel aligned with their hearts and their own North Stars. Because as you guys know, this was my North Star to make this transition, but you all have your own personal North Star. And I'm really passionate about helping people figure out what that is, what direction they want to go in, and how they can get there. Um, so, did you have engineering experience programming prior to getting your role, or was it more of an apprenticeship opportunity? Yeah, so my first role was an apprenticeship opportunity, and that essentially is a program where they're investing in you to continue learning. So my initial experience came in terms of like purely engineering focused. That initial experience came from the coding bootcamp and doing multiple projects. So I had about maybe 5 projects that I worked on using Ruby for backend, and then what was it, JavaScript for front end work. So that was where the bulk of my engineering experience came from, but I also did a lot of different like mini courses online that gave me more engineering experiences. I also did a tiny bit of like technical work at some of my previous roles. So at my marketing job, I did have a tiny bit of technical experience working with URLs and creating UTM codes for them. So I wasn't like super in the weeds there, but I did touch on getting some of that more technical experience. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, if any of this aligns with you, feel free to reach out. I love chatting and hearing people's stories. Just yesterday, I was chatting with my brother about his own career. He's about 7 years younger than I am. And he's in a transition phase where he's figuring out where he's going to go next. So we spent about an hour really just chatting through what his options are and what he finds exciting about each individual option. And at the same time, what makes the most sense in terms of the very next step, because sometimes our long-term vision and the immediate next step, they can align, but they might not be 100% congruent. So there's things to chat through there. So if you are watching this on LinkedIn, feel free to DM me. If you are watching on YouTube, take a look at the description box. And I will see you guys next week, where, as I mentioned, I'll be chatting through how I got my very first engineering role. I see another question came in. So was your job search led by eyeing on particular company and certain projects they were working on, which you were interested in, or were you open to any opportunity? So I am personally of the type that loves to zero in on particular companies. I don't recommend this for everyone, but I like to have a target in mind so that when I do research, I go super, super, super in depth in terms of researching that company, what they're looking for in their employees, um, how what they are looking for in their employees aligns with my experience, and how I can tell my story in a way that they truly understand the way that I'm a fit for the companies. And plus, as I mentioned earlier, I really like to work for companies that I feel are aligned with me, are aligned with either things that I'm curious about, things I'm excited about, something I'm going to do in the future, something I want to do in the future. So I really just pinpointed a particular company. But while I was doing that, researching that one company, I opened myself to multiple opportunities because, of course, I don't want to just laser focus in on one company and then things not work out. And then I'm kind of stuck. So that's not what I wanted. And therefore, I decided to broaden my search as much as possible, but really focus in on one individual company. In terms of projects, I wasn't necessarily very picky about where specifically I worked in terms of all the possible tracks within engineering. I was pretty open to that. So while at that point in time, I was very pointed about the company I wanted to work for, the projects, I was very, very, very open because I was still super new to the engineering world. And so I had no idea, one, not only what was available in terms of like the wide array of options available, but also what I would personally be interested in. So I just wanted to dip my toes in the water and really see what would come out of it. I just wanted to see what would come out of it. And that's why I didn't target any particular projects. I was pretty open there. Thanks for that question. I think that's a great question. Cool. Yep. So that is it for today. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to drop it in the next couple of seconds. Otherwise, I will catch you guys in our next videos next week, most likely around the same time next week. So have a really good weekend, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.